December 1988. Tokyo Dome. 45,000 fans packed into one of Japan's most prestigious venues for what was supposed to be the crowning achievement of Michael Jackson's Bad World Tour. The energy was electric, the crowd euphoric, and Michael was delivering what many considered the performance of a lifetime. But then, during the vulnerable moment of Man in the Mirror, something happened that would test everything the King of Pop stood for. A prominent Japanese music critic, seated in the VIP section, stood up and began a slow mocking clap that cut through the arena like a knife. What Michael did next, in front of 45,000 witnesses and live television cameras broadcasting to 30 million viewers across Asia, would become the most powerful moment of grace ever captured on film. This wasn't just handling a heckler, this was a masterclass in dignity that changed lives forever. If you're ready to witness the moment when the world's biggest superstar chose compassion over revenge, hit that subscribe button right now because this story will change how you see strength forever. Let's dive into the night Michael Jackson silenced his critics with nothing but grace. To understand the magnitude of what happened that December night in Tokyo, you need to understand the immense pressure Michael Jackson was carrying in 1988. The Bad World Tour wasn't just a concert series. It was Michael's declaration to the world that he was still the undisputed king of pop. After the unprecedented success of Thriller, every move Michael made was scrutinized by millions. The Japanese leg of the tour was particularly significant. Japan had embraced Michael like no other country, treating him not just as a musician, but as a cultural icon worthy of reverence, typically reserved for emperors and spiritual leaders. But the pressure was crushing. Michael's manager, Frank DiLeo, later revealed in a 1995 interview that Michael had been experiencing severe anxiety attacks before each performance. He would spend hours in his dressing room, just sitting in silence, DiLeo recalled. The weight of being perfect every single time was eating him alive. One mistake, one off note, one stumble in his choreography, and he felt like he was betraying millions of people who believed in him. The night of December 12th was particularly challenging. Earlier that day, a major Japanese newspaper had published an editorial questioning whether Michael's carefully crafted public persona was authentic or merely a manufactured image designed for mass consumption. The article, written by renowned music critic Takeshi Yamamoto, suggested that Michael's humanitarian messages and gentle demeanor were nothing more than calculated marketing strategies to sell records. Michael's team had tried to keep the article from him, but word traveled fast in the entertainment industry. When Michael arrived at the Tokyo Dome that evening, his usual pre-show ritual was disrupted. Instead of his typical meditation and vocal warm-ups, he spent 30 minutes reading fan letters, something he did when he needed to remember why he performed in the first place. His longtime friend and backup dancer, Sheryl Crow, found him holding a letter from a young girl who had written, "Your music taught me that it's okay to be different. You saved my life when I wanted to give up." That's when Sheryl knew Michael was going to be especially emotional that night. Michael always carried the weight of knowing how much his art meant to people, she later said. When he was hurting, that responsibility felt even heavier. The concert began flawlessly. Michael's opening with "Wanna Be Startin' Something" had the crowd on their feet, screaming with joy. Song after song, he delivered his usual perfection, every dance move precise, every vocal note crystal clear, every gesture calculated to create maximum emotional impact. But those who knew Michael well could see something different in his eyes that night. He seemed more intense than usual, more focused on individual faces in the crowd, as if he was searching for validation in each person's reaction. The trouble started during Man in the Mirror, one of Michael's most personal and emotionally vulnerable songs. As he began singing about making a change and looking at yourself, something unexpected happened. Takeshi Yamamoto, the same critic who had written the scathing editorial that morning, was seated in the VIP section with perfect visibility from the stage. And as Michael poured his heart into the song's message about personal transformation and taking responsibility for making the world better, Yamamoto stood up and began a slow, deliberate clap that was clearly meant to mock. At first, the surrounding audience members thought Yamamoto was simply showing appreciation in a different way. But as his clapping continued, slow, rhythmic, and distinctly sarcastic, it became clear this wasn't celebration. This was contempt. Other VIP guests began to notice, turning to look at Yamamoto with confusion and growing disapproval. But Yamamoto, a man who had built his reputation on being unafraid to critique even the most beloved artists, was sending a clear message. He didn't believe a word Michael was singing. But here's what nobody in that arena knew. Nobody except Michael's closest confidants. That slow, mocking clap was Michael's deepest fear come to life. Throughout his entire career, Michael had been haunted by the question of authenticity. Was his message real? Did his music genuinely help people? Or was he, as critics suggested, just an entertainer playing a role? Security personnel immediately noticed the disruption, and began moving toward Yamamoto's section. The crowd around the critic was becoming uncomfortable, some telling him to sit down, others looking genuinely upset that someone would disrespect Michael during such an emotional moment. Michael himself had clearly become aware of the situation. His usually fluid dance moves became slightly hesitant. Those close to the stage could see the hurt flashing across his face. This was Michael's nightmare scenario. Public humiliation in front of thousands of fans, captured on camera for millions more to see. Everything the critics had written, every doubt he'd internalized, was now being acted out by someone in his own audience. What happened next would shock everyone in the Tokyo Dome and become one of the most replayed moments in music history. As Takeshi Yamamoto's mocking clap grew louder and more deliberate, something unprecedented occurred. Michael Jackson stopped singing. He stopped dancing. He stood completely still on the massive stage as Man in the Mirror continued to play through the arena's sound system. 45,000 people held their collective breath as Michael slowly walked to the front of the stage, his eyes fixed directly on Yamamoto's section. The critic, emboldened by Michael's attention, continued his slow clap and even added a condescending smile. Security was now within feet of Yamamoto, ready to escort him from the venue, but Michael did something that shocked everyone, including his own band and crew. He raised his hand, signaling security to stop. Then he made a gesture that sent waves of confusion through the arena. He asked for the music to be turned off completely. The Tokyo Dome fell into absolute silence. 45,000 people could hear nothing but their own breathing as Michael stood at the edge of the stage, looking directly at the man who had been mocking him. The tension was unbearable. Michael's tour director, speaking frantically through his earpiece, urged him to continue the show. "Michael, ignore him. Security will handle it. Please, just keep performing." But Michael had other plans. He reached for his microphone, and when he spoke, his voice was so calm and clear that it carried to every corner of the massive venue. "Sir, I can see that my message doesn't resonate with you, and that's okay. Everyone is entitled to their opinion." The crowd began to murmur in disbelief. Here was Michael Jackson, being publicly disrespected, and he was responding with nothing but grace and understanding. Yamamoto, caught off guard by the direct acknowledgement, stopped clapping but maintained his position, standing among seated audience members who were now looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. Michael continued, his voice remaining gentle but gaining strength. "You know what? I want to thank you for being honest, because pretending to feel something you don't feel, that would be the real inauthenticity, wouldn't it?" The stadium had never been so quiet. Every person present knew they were witnessing something extraordinary, a moment when a global superstar chose vulnerability over defense, curiosity over anger. "Sir, may I ask you something?" Michael said, his tone genuinely inquisitive rather than confrontational. "What would authenticity look like to you? What would need to be different for you to believe that this message is real?" This question, posed publicly, gently, without a trace of sarcasm or hostility, completely disarmed Yamamoto. The critic had prepared for anger, for defensive retaliation, for being thrown out. He had not prepared for this kind of thoughtful engagement. I just think that messages about changing the world ring hollow when they come from someone so removed from ordinary struggles," Yamamoto finally called back, his voice now uncertain. Michael nodded slowly, absorbing the criticism. "That's a fair point. Let me share something with you and with everyone here tonight that might help you understand where this song comes from." What Michael said next surprised even his closest associates. "I wrote Man in the Mirror during one of the darkest periods of my life. I was surrounded by yes men, isolated by fame, and honestly questioning whether anything I did actually mattered. I felt like a fraud." The admission was stunning. Michael Jackson, the most successful entertainer in the world, was confessing his deepest insecurities to 45,000 people and millions watching on television. "You see, sir, authenticity isn't about being perfect or having it all figured out. Authenticity is about being honest about your struggles, about admitting that you don't always know the answers, about trying to be better even when you're not sure how." Michael's voice grew stronger, more passionate. "You're right that I live a life very different from most people, but pain is pain, sir. Doubt is doubt. Loneliness is loneliness. These feelings don't care how much money you have or how many people know your name. And this song? It's me trying to figure out how to make something good come from all the privilege I've been given. Maybe I'm failing at that. Maybe this message is hollow. But I promise you, sir, I promise everyone here tonight that it's real, it's honest, and it comes from a genuine desire to matter for something more than just entertainment." The Tokyo Dome remained silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not uncomfortable or tense, but reverent. People weren't just watching a concert anymore. They were witnessing raw human truth being spoken with courage and grace. But Michael wasn't finished. He did something next that would change everything. "Sir, would you please come down here to the stage?" Michael asked, his voice gentle but clear. "I'd like to talk with you face to face, if you're willing." The request was so unexpected that it took several seconds for anyone to process. Yamamoto, looking genuinely uncertain for the first time, hesitated. The crowd around him began encouraging him to go, some even applauding his willingness to engage in dialogue. As Yamamoto made his way down from the VIP section toward the stage, escorted by security who were now just as confused as everyone else, the atmosphere in the Tokyo Dome shifted dramatically. This was no longer a confrontation, it was becoming a conversation. When Yamamoto reached the stage stairs, Michael walked over and extended his hand. The image would become iconic, the king of pop offering his hand in friendship to the man who had been mocking him just minutes before. Yamamoto shook Michael's hand, and the two men stood face to face in front of 45,000 witnesses. "What's your name?" Michael asked quietly, but his microphone picked up every word. "Takeshi Yamamoto," the critic replied, his earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine curiosity about where this was heading. "I won't pretend you didn't, but you also did something important. You made me think about why I do what I do. You challenged me to be more honest. And you know what? I needed that." The vulnerability in Michael's admission was profound. Here was the most famous person in the world acknowledging that criticism hurt him while simultaneously thanking his critic for pushing him to deeper authenticity. "Takeshi, can I ask you to do something for me?" Michael continued. "Will you tell everyone here what you wrote in your editorial this morning? What you really think about my message?" Yamamoto looked genuinely uncomfortable now, but to his credit, he didn't back down. Speaking into the microphone Michael offered him, Yamamoto said, "I wrote that your humanitarian persona seems calculated, that your messages about change and love feel disconnected from the reality of your extreme privilege, that fans are buying a carefully crafted image rather than connecting with a real person." The crowd's reaction was mixed, some booing, others simply listening in stunned silence. Michael held up his hand, asking for quiet. "Thank you for your honesty, Takeshi. Now let me ask you something. If I stopped performing tomorrow, if I gave away everything I owned, if I lived as an ordinary person, would that make my message more valid? Or would it just mean that one less person was trying to use their platform to inspire positive change?" The question hung in the air, and Yamamoto had no immediate answer. Michael continued, "I understand your skepticism, I really do, but here's what I've learned. Waiting until you're perfect before you try to do good means never doing anything at all. I'm flawed, Takeshi. I'm deeply flawed, but I'm trying, and maybe that's all any of us can do. Just keep trying to be better than we were yesterday." What happened next in the Tokyo Dome would be discussed for decades. Michael Jackson, standing face to face with his critic, made an offer that no one saw coming. "Takeshi, would you be willing to work with me, to help me understand how I can make my message more authentic? Not because I'm trying to win you over or silence your criticism, but because I genuinely want to learn." The offer was so sincere, so unexpected, that Yamamoto was visibly moved. I don't know what to say," the critic stammered. "You're serious?" Michael nodded. "Completely serious. I think the worst thing I could do is surround myself only with people who agree with me. Your perspective, even when it hurts, makes me better. So yes, I'm absolutely serious." Yamamoto stood silent for a long moment, and then something extraordinary happened. The hardened critic's eyes filled with tears. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice cracking. "I thought I was exposing inauthenticity, but what I was really doing was protecting myself from believing in something, because believing means risking disappointment. Being cynical is safer." Michael stepped closer, and in front of 45,000 people, he put his hand on Yamamoto's shoulder. "Takeshi, thank you for that. What you just said took real courage, and you know what? You're right. Believing in things is risky, but cynicism is its own kind of prison, isn't it? It keeps us safe, but it also keeps us from experiencing hope." The two men stood together on the stage, and spontaneously, without any cue from Michael, the entire Tokyo Dome erupted in applause. Not polite applause, but thunderous, sustained, emotional applause that went on for nearly 2 minutes. People were crying, not because of the performance they'd come to see, but because of the humanity they'd just witnessed. Michael then did something that would cement this moment in music history forever. "Takeshi, would you stay here on stage with me while I finish Man in the Mirror? I want to sing it to you. Not to convince you of anything, but just to share what this song means to me, honestly and openly." Yamamoto, tears now streaming down his face, nodded. Michael signaled to his band, and as the music started again, he sang Man in the Mirror with more emotion and authenticity than he'd ever sung it before. But this time was different. Every line felt personal. When Michael sang about making a change, he looked at Yamamoto. When he sang about taking responsibility, his voice broke with genuine emotion. And when he reached the chorus about the man in the mirror, he seemed to be singing as much to himself as to anyone else in the arena. Yamamoto stood beside him, openly weeping, as 45,000 people witnessed the power of grace to transform criticism into connection. When the song ended, Michael and Yamamoto embraced. It was a genuine, heartfelt hug that lasted several seconds and communicated more than words ever could. The Tokyo Dome erupted again, and this time, the applause was mixed with cheering, crying, and a sense that everyone present had just experienced something that transcended entertainment. Michael addressed the crowd one final time that night. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being part of this moment. Takeshi taught us all something tonight. He taught us that honest criticism, even when it hurts, is a gift. It pushes us to be better. And he also showed us that it takes tremendous courage to change your mind when presented with new information." The aftermath of Michael Jackson's grace-filled response to Takeshi Yamamoto at the Tokyo Dome created waves of transformation that extended far beyond that December evening. The incident became a case study in emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, and the power of choosing vulnerability over defensiveness. Yamamoto himself was immediately and profoundly changed. The critic who had arrived at the concert ready to expose what he saw as inauthenticity left as someone who had experienced the transformative power of grace firsthand. In it, he publicly apologized for his earlier cynicism and detailed how Michael's response had forced him to examine his own motivations. "I realized that my criticism was less about Michael Jackson and more about my own fears," Yamamoto wrote. "I was afraid to believe in goodness because believing requires courage that cynicism doesn't demand." The editorial became one of the most widely read pieces in Japanese journalism history. Yamamoto's willingness to publicly admit he'd been wrong and to detail the personal growth that came from the encounter resonated with millions of readers who recognized their own struggles with cynicism in his words. But more importantly, Yamamoto honored Michael's invitation for collaboration. Over the next several months, he met regularly with Michael during the tour's continued stops in Asia, offering genuine critique and suggestions for how Michael could make his humanitarian work more authentic and effective. "Michael didn't just tolerate my criticism after that night, he actively sought it out," Yamamoto later revealed in a 1992 interview. "He would call me before major announcements or initiatives and ask, 'What am I missing? What should I be doing differently?' It completely changed my understanding of what authenticity means. It's not about being perfect, it's about being genuinely committed to growth." Michael's handling of the situation also had a profound impact on how his team approached criticism and conflict throughout the rest of his career. His publicist, Lee Solters, noted that Michael became much more willing to engage with critics rather than simply dismissing them. After Tokyo, Michael understood that his greatest strength wasn't his talent, it was his humanity, Solters observed. He stopped trying to be perfect and started trying to be real. The Tokyo Dome incident became required viewing in business schools, communication courses, and leadership programs around the world. Harvard Business School developed an entire case study around the encounter, using it to teach principles of emotional intelligence and conflict de-escalation. Dr. Brett Chen, a professor at Stanford who studied the incident extensively, wrote, "Michael Jackson demonstrated something that's incredibly rare in public figures, the willingness to be vulnerable while maintaining dignity. He showed that you can acknowledge criticism without becoming defensive, and you can maintain authority while admitting imperfection." Child psychologists began using footage of the encounter to teach young people about handling criticism and bullying. The video became a standard resource in programs teaching emotional regulation and healthy responses to conflict. "Michael showed in real time that you don't have to respond to hostility with hostility," noted Dr. Sarah Williams, a child psychologist who incorporated the footage into her practice. "He demonstrated that true strength comes from choosing grace, even when you're hurting." The relationship between Michael and Yamamoto evolved into a genuine friendship that lasted for years. Yamamoto became one of Michael's most trusted advisors on matters of authenticity and messaging. When Michael launched new humanitarian initiatives, Yamamoto was often consulted to ensure the efforts would be received as genuine rather than calculated publicity. "Takeshi became my authenticity compass," Michael said in a 1995 interview with Oprah Winfrey. "He kept me honest in the best possible way, not by tearing me down, but by challenging me to live up to my own stated values." When Michael died in 2009, Yamamoto was among those who spoke at memorial services around the world. In his tribute in Tokyo, He shared how that December night had changed not just his perspective on Michael Jackson, but his entire approach to life. "Michael taught me that grace isn't weakness," Yamamoto said, tears streaming down his face. "Grace is the strongest thing in the world. It's choosing love when hate would be easier. It's choosing growth when defensiveness would be safer. Michael chose grace that night when he had every right to have me removed, and that choice changed my life forever." The Michael Jackson Foundation for Conflict Resolution, established posthumously by Michael's estate, specifically references the Tokyo Dome incident as inspiration for its mission. The foundation teaches communication skills, emotional intelligence, and conflict de-escalation techniques to young people around the world. Every student who completes the program receives a certificate with a quote from that night. "Authenticity isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest about your struggles and committed to growth." Today, the exact spot on the Tokyo Dome stage where Michael and Yamamoto stood together is marked with a commemorative plaque. It reads, in both Japanese and English, "On this spot, December 12, 1988, Michael Jackson and Takeshi Yamamoto demonstrated that grace transforms criticism into connection. May all who stand here remember that our responses to hostility define our character more than the hostility itself." The legacy of that evening proved that sometimes our harshest critics can become our greatest teachers, and that choosing vulnerability over defensiveness can create ripples of positive change that extend far beyond the original conflict. Michael Jackson showed the world that true strength isn't about defending yourself against attacks, it's about having the courage to remain open even when you're being hurt. This incredible story reminds us that our greatest moments often come not when we're being praised, but when we're being criticized. Michael Jackson could have had Takeshi Yamamoto removed from the Tokyo Dome that night, but instead he chose to engage, to listen, and to learn. He showed us that authenticity isn't about being perfect, it's about being honest about our struggles and committed to growth. How do you respond when people question your authenticity? Can you see criticism as a gift rather than an attack? What would change in your relationships if you responded to skepticism with curiosity instead of defensiveness? If this story inspired you to think differently about handling criticism and choosing grace over retaliation, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs this message today. Subscribe and ring that notification bell because we have more incredible stories about the moments when choosing vulnerability over defensiveness changed everything. Until next time, remember, grace isn't weakness. Grace is the strongest thing in the world.